Hello and welcome to episode number 8 of the Alfology2 podcast. Might be some new listeners today due to the topic of conversation, which I'll be banging on about. So if you are one of those, go back to the start, listen to all of it. Hopefully you'll see how we've improved today. Every episode's about a completely different topic. So hopefully there will be at least something interesting in there to interest you. If you're watching this via YouTube and not consuming via a podcast app, you will be able to see that I am comically holding my microphone up to my face. The reason for that is that my microphone is very crummy, not particularly good, very cheap, because this is a low budget podcast. And basically in previous episodes, it was picking up too much of my laptop fan and too much reverb. So ultimately, the sound quality wasn't very good. So we are changing that today. That is going to be held up to my face. And actually, it's quite a good gag anyway. Like, I look ridiculous holding this here. So, that's, I guess, quite funny. And hopefully will improve the overall quality as well. Before we get going, just want to talk about the development of the podcast a little bit, very, very briefly, because I don't want to bore anyone. But there is now a website for the podcast, which is Alfology2.com. You can get all the episodes through there, and you can also send me emails about how shit the podcast is and stuff. And also social media, so Instagram Alfology_2 and Twitter Alfology2, both there. So you can again send me abuse directly. Anyway, let's move on to the topic of today's podcast. What we're going to be talking about today is Football Manager and overpopulation, and how Football Manager can be used to prevent human overpopulation of the earth. It's probably a pretty simplistic idea when you come down to it, despite being quite unique and off the wall, and probably something no one's ever thought of before. But we'll get to that when we get to it. What I want to initially talk about is why Football Manager is more popular than sex, or at least per person, Football Manager is more popular than sex. And this will develop into using Football Manager to overtake sex as a pastime and therefore control overpopulation. That's essentially the idea. So look, I've crunched the numbers, and Football Manager is more popular than sex. That per person who uses Football Manager and per person who uses sex, Football Manager absolutely destroys sex, just wipes it out, like not even a competition. The only problem is not enough people use Football Manager to take on the overall sort of number of sex hours a year. So that really is part of what this podcast can be about. How much you need to increase Football Manager time to overtake sex as a pastime and therefore bring overpopulation down and sort of stem the birth rate. So look, I've done some numbers which I have written on this pad in front of me. Look, Miles Jacobson, who is head of Football Manager, or he's some sort of big cheese down there, been there for years. He's been tweeting recently about Football Manager itself and about how it sold 1 million copies since the last edition was released. I think the last edition was released in October or November last year, in 2018. So since then, they've sold 1 million copies. But it's not really very reliable data because the year's not finished yet. So we're going to go off data from Football Manager 2018 for the purposes of this, and working out how often people play and how many hours are played a year. Just before I get started, maybe there are some listeners who haven't heard of Football Manager or aren't very familiar with it. So I'll just briefly explain that. It's a game or a simulation played by a lot of football fans and some strategy game fans, where you essentially take on the role of being, funnily enough, a football manager. And then you have to basically do their job. It's pretty much like work. You basically go to work, but you're at home on your laptop. You have to analyze spreadsheets and emails and deal with staff and recruitment, but it's all in the context, obviously, football. So you can develop your own players, you can take charge of your favorite team, you can change your own tactics, you can do training, you can buy players, you can manage finances, and ultimately, it's just fucking brilliant. What a game! It's unreal, and I love it personally. Personally, I manage Shamrock Rovers, who are my local team from when I lived in Ireland. And I've won 25 consecutive league titles. Haven't quite won the Champions League, because my greatest regret. Should have won it already, but I haven't. Won the Europa League, won lots of stuff. And the great thing about Football Manager, which gives it so much longevity and why so many people play it for so long, is because of how it moves through time. So once all the real players have retired, so if you go 10 years into the game and all your real players have retired from your team, Football Manager will generate fake players each year to replace them. So obviously some teams will get good players, some not so good, and this enables that there to be an ongoing dynamic in the game. So good teams can get bad teams can get good, and it can actually go on just indefinitely. You can just play, to the end of time. There are some people who have played hundreds of years into the future. And the other reason why it's so popular is because it allows you to take your local team or a smaller team to international glory. So that's why it's so popular. That's a bit about Football Manager and why it's so good. And it is good. Like, I discovered it in 2005 when I was 10. And really, I haven't looked back since. I've probably played almost every day since then. I'm totally addicted, and I love it. But that's sort of besides the point. I didn't come here to say why Football Manager was so good, but ultimately it is, and believe me, and even if you're not a football fan, just get it because it's awesome. Anyway, right, so why is it better than sex? I know it's quite a big call, and there's going to be lots of really quite pretend macho people saying, oh yeah, he prefers Football Manager to sex, but actually it's true, and I can prove it, that people or Football Manager players prefer it to sex. They spend more of their time per year playing it than they do having sex. And that is unbelievable, really, I guess, that these people have X amount of sex available to them and X amount of Football Manager available to them, and they choose to play so much more Football Manager. What you might say is that Football Manager players wouldn't have a lot of sex, but obviously they would. They're the fucking biggest studs, like they are. Yeah, if they weren't playing Football Manager, they would just be out shagging everything left, right, and center. So you can just go away with that comment. Anyway, right. So Football Manager stats. So 1 million copies were sold of Football Manager 2018 as of about a month before Football Manager 2019 came out. So just for argument's sake, let's say that they sold 1 million copies of that game. Miles Jacobson, head of Sports Interactive, as discussed earlier, he tweeted that the average gamer on that did 285 hours worth of Football Manager. So the average person who bought it played 285 hours, which is about 12 days, which is insane. You've got to give it to it. It's unprecedented for a single player game. Basically, it just hasn't happened before with any other single player game. So really got to give it to Football Manager there. And if you compare that to the numbers of sex, then Football Manager really is trashing it. It's making it its bitch. It's putting its pants down. So on to the bit that we want to talk about now, everyone wants to hear about, which is a bit about sex and a bit about sex statistics. So when we talk about British people and the average amount of time that a British person would have sex, and I'm going to multiply that across the world, just my stats, because to be honest, I wasn't really... I guess I'm too lazy to do that amount of research, so I just haven't done it, which very much replicates me at school and at work. So I've done a bit of research, and I've got some numbers about the amount of sex that people have in the UK. That makes 5,778 times in a lifetime, apparently, according to these stats. So the average person in the UK has sex 5,778 times during their entire life, and the average lifespan is 83 years. So that's approximately 69.6 times a year, which is hilarious because obviously 69 is like sex and stuff. So that's obviously hilarious. But there's going to be some times towards the end of your life, and in theory, a lot of times towards the start of your life where you're not having sex. But just for the purpose of this, divide it across 69.6 times per year that the average person has sex. According to this, the average vaginal sex session, so penis in vagina, but that's what we're talking about. We're talking about making babies for this overall, not oral sex or solo sex or anal sex or gay sex or whatever. We're talking about overpopulation, so we're talking about penis in vagina, which obviously is fun to say. That's why I said it twice. 5.4 minutes is the average session from the moment of insertion to the moment of ejaculation, which was done by some scientists giving people stopwatches and telling them to go. So the average time that the man would last is 5.4 minutes, which I guess seems a bit short, but maybe when you think about it, that the only reason why you would have heard that it's much longer than that is because the only people that ever talk about it being much longer than that are the people who last like a really long time, which is obviously ladies like me. No, so right, that's why that average is probably lower than you'd think, but that is the average time according to some scientists who I will hopefully remember where I got that data from, and I will credit them in the description. Which means that the average person, the average British person during the course of a year is having sex for 375.9 minutes, or also known as 6.3 hours. So the average person spends 6.3 hours a year having sex. So let's weigh it up. This is what I'm going to prove to you, that the average Football Manager fan enjoys sex less than they enjoy Football Manager. And it's true. So 6.3 hours of sex per year per person. It's not 285 hours, is it? You don't have to be Albert Einstein. Third time I've mentioned Albert Einstein on the podcast now. Probably getting a bit obsessed with him. But yeah, you don't have to be Albert Einstein to work out that 285 hours is more than 6.3. It's considerably more, isn't it? That's a lot. Sex has got to do a lot of catching up. Then again, imagine having sex constantly for 12 days a year. 12 days a year of constant sex. You'd be raw. Everybody would be raw. I'd be in tears. Be crying. Begging for mercy. But then again, 6.3 hours, that's a quarter of a day. That's not anything. But that is apparently the average. So look, I have managed to prove it. So 285 hours is more than 6. So what are you going to do? How are you going to argue about that? Football Manager is more enjoyable than sex. People would rather play Football Manager than have sex. And that is the only conclusion that you can draw from the data available. There is no other data which can contradict that. So I would say that this is now a scientific fact. Football Manager better than sex. There we go. Nice. Right. So moving on, we now need to work out how we're going to use Football Manager and all its greatness to replace sex as a pastime globally. Not replace it entirely. We don't want the human race to die out. Well, some people do, but I don't personally. But just enough to bring it down so that overpopulation doesn't become a huge problem. The plan for this is just pretty much to sell as many copies of Football Manager as we can and sell enough copies that there is currently more Football Manager being played than the current amount of sex. So we need to replicate the current sex hours per year in Football Manager hours, and hopefully that would bring the number of sex hours down. But who knows? Maybe people will just do both. But if anyone's got any better ideas, then do feel free to shout, because I don't. So we're doing it this way. All right. Right. So what we need to do, first of all, is work out how many sex hours are had per year, which is quite easy. You have to work out the population figures to do that. Luckily, the internet's already done that, and I've done the research. And just whilst I'm talking about this, I will talk about human overpopulation very quickly, just because obviously that's what we're trying to sort out. So in 1804, there were 1 billion people in the world. So 215 years ago, 1 billion people. Today, or by 2020, the stats seem to cross over a little bit, but roughly around now, there are 7.7 billion people in the world. So that's up by 6.7 billion in the last 200 years. And before that, it had remained, I guess, reasonably static, which obviously is not good. I'm currently sat in the hottest room known to man, which is probably due to climate change, climate breakdown. And if you have more people, that's not going to get any better because each individual person's got their own carbon footprint. They'll destroy biodiversity, building homes, taking up room, traveling, not enough water for everybody, not enough food for everybody, just impacts on natural resources. You obviously, there'll be fewer of them because you have to use them. So ultimately, we don't want too many people. We want a constant replacement of the people we've got. Basically, the UN are saying that by the end of this century, that there will be about 10 to 14 billion people, depending on which model you use, which is just too many. Just too many. But going back to the current stats, there are 7.7 billion people in the world. If you times that by 6.3 hours per year, that is 48.5 billion hours spent having sex per year. Obviously, if you add up the current Football Manager, that's only 285 million hours spent playing Football Manager per year overall. So globally, sex is, for want of a better term, on top against Football Manager, 285 million hours versus 48.5 billion hours. So what I've done the maths, and the maths is that is 170 times the amount of sex being had in the Football Manager. So we need to increase Football Manager copies sold by 170 times. But that's actually not true, because each sex session, each person having sex has to be having sex with somebody else. These are facts. You can't have sex. You can't have vaginal reproductive sex on your own. You have to do it with somebody else. So what you do is you divide that number in half. So you only need to sell 85 million copies to overtake sex. So how are we going to sell 85 million copies is the question. The answer to that isn't easy. That's 85 times the amount that they currently sell on Football Manager. And you'd have to assume that those people would play the same amount, which obviously they would because it's such a fucking great game. Right. So how do we do that? These ways are actually not that particularly interesting, so I'm going to just fly through them. It's not really the main bulk of what the podcast is about. It's supposed to be lighthearted and unique, and really getting down into strategies for growing Football Manager probably isn't the best way of doing it. Anyway, we explore new countries. So Football Manager is quite limited in the countries it ships to at the moment. Most fans are in Europe, maybe some in the States, and maybe some in like Australia, New Zealand, mostly the Western world. Which isn't ideal. Most people are in Asia. Obviously, India's got more than 1 billion people. China's got more than 1.5 billion. And Africa, there are hundreds of millions of people living in Africa as well. So Football Manager would really need to expand there. I think they don't sell in Germany and they don't sell in Brazil at the moment, which maybe they do sell in Germany, not sure, but they definitely don't sell in Brazil. So opening up to those markets, obviously sell more copies, prevent more sex from happening, would be great. Make it cheaper, particularly for those like developing countries, because potentially people wouldn't have the resources with which to buy it. So they're already making a lot of profit from the European copies being sold. So just sell the other ones at a cut price. You don't have to do there's not any extra effort going into producing those copies because they're all online copies. So that would probably sell more copies, supply and demand and all that. I've got a C in economics, so I know what I'm talking about. But yeah, supply and demand, if there's more supply it will be cheaper. I think that's it. Anyway, get more women involved. I would say I'm in a few Football Manager communities online and there are almost no women, certainly not any visible ones. So more women involved. Add women's football to Football Manager maybe might help. Televise Football Manager. Get people watching it on telly. Get rid of real football. Just put Football Manager on TV all the time. People see it on TV, think, oh, I could play. And also you could then get professional Football Manager players, which would be awesome. I'd totally be one, so do that. Right, that was pretty much it in terms of the way you're going to do that. I'm not the biggest genius in the world. And really, there needs to be a lot of buy-in from football manager themselves and people all around the globe and the current football manager community to do this. So if you are listening to this, then please do tell your friends. And if you don't have any friends, tell random strangers on the street by shouting at them. This needs your help. This needs people to get the idea out there that Football Manager will solve overpopulation problems and therefore will save the planet. So if saving the planet isn't enough motivation for you, then I don't really know what I can do to help you. So if you could just do it, just tell your friends, tell the internet, tell random strangers on the street that they need to purchase a copy of Football Manager and that they need to distribute Football Manager around the world to save the planet. That would be great. That's pretty much all I've got for you today, I think. It's been a bit of a rant and maybe not quite as funny or lighthearted as I thought it was going to be, bearing in mind the subject matter is fucking ridiculous. But hopefully the lessons you've taken away is that Football Manager can save the world and should save the world, and that it is undeniably, if you're using evidence-based theories, undeniably more fun than sex. So, if you're having sex, stop having it and play Football Manager instead, because you'll be happier and it will make your life more enriched for a greater period of time. That's pretty much all from me. Do subscribe, click the like button, click the 5-star button, whichever medium you're listening to this through or watching this through. Give it all the praise that you can possibly give it, unless you hated it, in which case do feel free to send abuse and downvotes and just get in touch with me directly to call me a wanker. That's fine. I've got no issue with it. Follow on social media. So that's Alfology2 on Twitter, Alfology_2 on Instagram, and check out the website, alfology2.com. Do tune in next time. New episode will be coming out not too far from now, maybe in a few days, might be Wednesday. If not, it'll be the following Sunday. And that will be about repackaging the Bible to be a Lord of the Rings style epic and how I would do that. So that promises to be very fun. So yeah, please subscribe. Please get involved. Please talk to me about the podcast and I would love to talk to you back. And other than that, thank you very much for listening.